Welcome to another episode of the MMA Lockcast. I'm your host, Manpreet, aka MMA Lock of the Night, your boy on social media at MMALOTN, and the architect behind the MMA Fight Archive, where we're slowly approaching 5,300 fighter profiles for you to browse through and ensure that you're getting as many direct links as possible to these competitors' past fights so that you can research and know exactly what to expect when they step foot in the cage on the weekends. We covered 20 different promotions from all over the world and staying on top of it so you can have the entire schedule available to you as soon as possible. We have the MMA Fight Archive up for you, and just know with the ESPN Plus links going down now, we do have alternatives set up until the UFC finds a new broadcasting partner, and we'll be able to update the links after that, but we still have you covered in the meantime. 7-day free trial for you to try it out for free. Check the link in the description below. Once again, that is the MMA Fight Archive. Ensure you leave no stone unturned when you're researching these upcoming MMA events. All right, this week we're talking about UFC 316 as the UFC heads back to the pay-per-view format and hits up Newark, New Jersey with a doubleheader of bantamweight title fights. In the co-main event, we have Juliana Pena looking to successfully defend her title for the first time as she takes on the juggernaut Kayla Harrison, who's going to be looking to finally strap that UFC gold around her waist. And then in the main event, we have bantamweight champion Merab Dvalishvili looking for his second successful title defense as he takes on the fighter that he won the title from back in September, Sugar Sean O'Malley. Maybe not a rematch that everybody was clamoring for, but it keeps the champion busy and gives us enough time to try to figure out who the next contender should be. And we also have some decent other fights to sprinkle out on this main card, but as we obviously have you covered here for all 13 fights, you know where to come to for your full card breakdowns. Now, I quickly want to just recap this last weekend's UFC card, which was very weird all around, and probably one of my worst prediction cards all year. I think I went 4 of 5 on predictions. In terms of my best predictions, I went 2 of 7. Absolutely horrendous there. Pretty much got reverse swept on the card, if we're being honest. And I was very bummed that the Dvalishvili fight got canceled pretty much during the walk-ins or right before the walk-ins there, as I would have loved to see how that fight played out. Had a little bit of money sprinkled on the sub props for the later rounds, so that would have been a nice way to try to cut into the deficit, but we still take an L all around there, and we try to move on to this next event and try to get back into the green. So, quick recap. Lock of the night play was Zachary Reese and Dushko Todorovic under 1.5 rounds at -170. Haven't watched the card yet, if I'm being honest. You know, I was busy over the weekend, so I didn't really get to see how badly I had lost some of these spots, and especially this Reese under 1.5. Very surprised, and it ended up hitting the scorecards. But I did hit my Cage Warriors lock of the night play, so we went 1-1 over the weekend. That now keeps our record at a 50% hit rate at 22-22 on the year. Again, I just can't figure out this goddamn thing this year with the lock of the night plays. Got half the year still to go. Still trying to figure that damn thing out. Dog of the night plays, we go 1-1 on the weekend, which again, for dog of the night plays, you're hitting 50% at least. That means you're profiting, and that's exactly the case here. Jafel Filho fell short to Alan Nascimento, but Ryan Shelley managed to cash as our dog of the night play for Cage Warriors at +140. So that brings our dog of the night record now to 27-25 on the year for a 52% hit rate. So dog of the night doing better than the lock of the night, which is absurd to me. But it is what it is. We try to keep things moving on here and try to get back into the green for the lock of the night plays. No other events going on this weekend that I'll be covering. Obviously, just the UFC card, but next week we'll be back on the regional scene with a ton of events. We got PFL 5 going down, LFA 210, Octagon 72, and KSW 107. I'll have all those covered on the lock of the night Patreon page in written form. DGen plays, parlays, all of that good stuff can be found over there. But we got to turn it around for the UFC this weekend first before I can start plugging that stuff over there. All right, like I said, we got 13 fights to talk about for this UFC 316 card. Couple newcomers, couple short notice replacements. So let's get right into this bad boy. First fight up in the lightweight division. We got Mederos coming in at minus 250, going up against Choinski, who comes in at plus 210. Now, starting off on the Mederos side of things, I did fade him last time around with Austin Hubbard. I believe that fight was back in March, and it really came down to the third round. You know, it was close. It was obvious that Mederos won the first round, obvious that Hubbard won the second, and it looked like Hubbard was going on to replicate what he did in the second round in the third round until there was about 2 minutes left when Mederos was able to kind of reverse the position, land some elbows, cut the side of the head of Hubbard, and then land some good shots to end off the round to really put a stamp on that round and win that fight by split decision. You know, I thought it was obvious that Mederos was the one doing more damage and outweighing the control time of Hubbard in that third round. So, as bitter as I am, I do believe that Mederos was the rightful winner that night, even though it came by split decision. He's a decent striker, good combinations, attacks the calf very well, has a decent grappling game of his own, but obviously some question marks in the grappling realm, especially when he fights guys that are very skilled in that realm. Hubbard, you know, decent grappler, but there are obviously going to be much better grapplers that Mederos will go up against in the lightweight division. He was formerly a part of Factory X, but last October changed camps and went down to Arizona to train alongside the MMA lab, and you actually saw Benson Henderson and John Crouch in his corner in his last matchup. Now, he's going up against UFC newcomer on short notice here, Choinski, who is a Rufus Sport representative and was the Anthony Pettis FC lightweight champion. Pettis has been kind of tooting the horn of Choinski for a couple years now, and you can see why with his 8-0 undefeated record, his 3-0 amateur record as well, and the fact that he's finished 6 of his 8 wins inside the distance, the majority of them coming by submission. He's a 3-time NCAA All-American, and you can see that on display when he looks to take his opponents to the ground, and then from there does a great job in terms of building up his BJJ skills to catch up to his wrestling so he can really dominate on the mat even more, dragging opponents into dominant positions and then looking for submission opportunities. He's very strong, he's very dense, he's a solid striker, or at least a developing striker. Obviously with Rufus Sport known for its kickboxing and striking concepts, Choinski is a guy that's kind of seamlessly transitioned into that style of mixed martial arts where he's been able to throw some big power punches and then eventually mass some takedowns behind it to try to get fights to the ground. Now here against Mederos, Choinski is going to need the full bag to try to get the job done, but luckily the strength that he has might be the weakness in Mederos' game, and that's the grappling realm. Right, Choinski has a bag of different takedown attempts that he can try to put on Mederos here, and I think he'll be successful in switching it up enough to eventually get Mederos down and grind him out. Choinski, even though taking this fight on short notice, was scheduled to fight next weekend and defend his APFC title over 5 rounds, so you know he's ready to go a hard 3 if he needs to. All he needed to do was just bring his weight cut up a week, and being a wrestler, you know that he already has that skill set, or that, at least that strength in his back pocket to be able to cut weight at a decent pace. I like Choinski here. I think he puts a pace on Mederos, grinds him out, lands some big shots on the feet, but ultimately gets the job done by grinding him out on the mat and winning this fight on the scorecards. All right, next up, we got Salkilld coming in at minus 450, going up against Ashmouz, who comes in at plus 350. Now, starting off on the Salkilld side, this is easily one of my favorite prospects from the Contender Series this past season, not just because of his vicious Muay Thai approach, but also because he has a nasty BJJ black belt he's been able to put to use against some of his opponents. His fight against Gage Young this past season was one of the better fights, especially where we saw 2 guys that are clearly UFC level. And just a side note, I'm very happy that Gage Young was able to get that short notice UFC signing back at UFC Kansas City a few months back, because he more than deserved to be on the UFC roster as well. But getting back to Salkilld, that fight against Young was very impressive. He clearly won the first round. Second round, it seemed like he was starting to slow down a bit, and Gage Young was taking the momentum in his favor, but Salkilld was able to dig deep in the third round, snatch that momentum back, and eventually get that victory, showcasing all sides of his MMA skill set to try to get the win there. He shows, like I said, nasty striking, good Muay Thai, good combination striking, some nasty knees as well, but it's also his ability on the ground, where he's been very aggressive with his BJJ approach, but also from that top position, he can showcase some solid control. He's going up against Ashmouz here, who, well, actually, just quickly talking about Salkild's last fight, much easier than his Contender Series matchup, where he was able to get a 19-second knockout over Anshul Jubli, showcasing that he could have some stinging power of his own that a lot of fighters need to be worried about. Now, talking about Ashmouz now, who is now 2-1 in the UFC, but that one loss coming to Chris Duncan, I believe was in July of 2023. That was a fight where he injured his arm in the first round of the fight and still managed to make it a full 15 minutes, obviously coming up on the short end of the stick that night. But he did manage to bounce back in September of this past year, where he was able to grind out Trevor Peek over 15 minutes and win that fight on the scorecards. Now, if you just judge him on his UFC debut against against Sam Patterson, you think he's just a power puncher. But it's clear that he has some decent grappling chops as well, with his ability to utilize his physicality to keep opponents up against the cage and then eventually drag them to the ground where he can do some good damage from that top position. Just going through this guy's IG page, it's clear that strength is a huge point of emphasis for him, so he can utilize that strength to nullify opponents. And he at 5'9", he might be on the shorter end of the stick when it comes to lightweights, so making up for it with that strength will definitely be beneficial for him. He also trains out of a very underrated gym called K Dojo out in New Jersey, if I'm not mistaken, and that's a gym that Khabib Nurmagomedov started off in when he came on this side of the pond before transitioning over to American Kickboxing Academy a few years later, if I'm not mistaken. But that's also home to current LFA welterweight champion Shamid Khan Magomedov, who is also a former Ultimate Fighter contestant. Ashmouz, very live underdog here. Now, I'm not going to go so far to the point of actually picking him to win this matchup. In terms of a prediction, I am going to go Salkilld. I think he is the more skilled fighter here, and I think his striking advantage here could really help him butcher Ashmouz from distance, and I think his BJJ could keep him safe in some of these grappling positions. But do not be surprised if Ashmouz is able to get a lot of control time up against the cage, maybe land a few takedowns and land some good damage from that top position, but also the power that he brings to the table could catch Salkilld off guard. I'm going to lean Salkilld still, as I think that his durability will hold up for him here, and he should be urgent enough in those clinch positions to work out of these bad spots, and from there I expect him to chip away at Ashmouz and win this fight on the scorecards. But don't be surprised if you see me actually pulling the trigger on Ashmouz for odds sake in this fight. All right, next up, in the featherweight division, we got Jeka Saragih coming in at plus 385, going up against UFC newcomer Ju Sang Yu, who comes in at minus 510. Now, starting off on the Saragih side of things, he's coming off of a submission loss to Weston Wilson from last year, and that was a fight where, it seemed like everybody and their mother was on that Weston Wilson round one sub prop, and for good reason. Saragih, coming from Indonesia, is normally a type of fighter that, similar to fighters coming out of India. They're very low level. Like, with Saragih, he's very violent in terms of just throwing big power, blitzing the pocket, looking to land his big winging shots, just as he did against Lucas Alexander in a fight that he was a big underdog in. That's what he can be successful in. Even the Wan Bin Ki fight on the road to UFC, that's a fight where I thought he was outskilled, but still managed to land his big power and showcase that power can nullify any type of skill advantage that opponents may have over him. But we saw in the Weston Wilson fight, as soon as Wilson got that fight to the ground, he was able to wrap Saragih up in a pretzel and eventually find the submission by putting him away that night. That's where Saragih needs to improve his game if he hopes to hold on to his UFC roster spot. And to his credit, he's trying to do that. He's transitioned over to the MMA Fight Academy, which is pretty much a developmental gym that Cage Warriors owner Graham Boyle has put together over there in San Diego, California, where he has a lot of his high-level prospects training at that gym and trying to level each other up. Notably Teddy Stringer, a very good grappler, and you can see that Saragih is trying to improve that aspect of his game. Unfortunately for him, I just don't think he can put it together enough over the last year to try to be competitive against guys that already have those chops, in their back pocket over the last several years, coming up in those disciplines and really being able to take advantage of Saragih in those spots. And unfortunately for Saragih, he's facing somebody that will exploit those chops here in Ju Sang Yu. Now, Yu was actually on looking for a fight this past episode, I believe, which was shot in December on the Korean Zombie show, and he was able to pull off a nasty 1-minute knockout. I believe it was a 75-second knockout, if I'm not mistaken. Regardless, quickly put his opponent away, who is a former road to UFC competitor. So it obviously adds a little bit of more allure to that victory, and which is why the matchmakers probably decided to sign him up. And even before that, he was able to grind out a former Contender Series opponent, utilizing a full mixed martial arts game, from grinding him out for the first half of the round to eventually throwing down on the feet and really just stamping his dominance in that fight and winning it on the scorecards. Yu is a very talented fighter. He's 31 years old, has some nasty striking, has some boxing credentials as well, but it's really his ground game that sets him apart against most opponents, where he's been able to smash them from that top position. And like I said, it's going to be a tough night for Saragih, trying to deal with that type of power, strength, and just grappling chops that he's going to be getting from Yu here. We might see a few good things from Saragih in terms of defensive work early, but for the most part, I think we'll see Yu get this fight to the ground almost immediately, and then within the first round, he should be able to get that finish. So to be able to get that under 1.5, currently at plus money, I think is a bit of a steal in this spot, and more than worthy of a consideration to take a shot on, maybe even a relatively big bet. So whether it's the under 1.5 or taking Yu to win in round one, I think either of those spots will be very profitable in this fight. Maybe taking the under 1.5 just to be safe in case Saragih does land a big shot to cover that aspect, or that cover that potential outcome. But I think Yu dominates here. I think he's more than worthy of that minus 500-ish price tag that he's currently at, and I think he wins this fight probably by TKO, maybe submission, but I think he gets it done in the first round with ease. All right, next up, in the women's flyweight division, we got Ariane Lipski coming in at plus 280, going up against Wang, who comes in at minus 360. Now, Lipski had a pretty good 3-fight winning streak going for her back in 2023, where she showcased some of her queen of violence tendencies by letting go with her striking and battering opponents on the feet, ultimately winning 2 of those 3 fights on the scorecards, even getting a submission victory over Casey O'Neill as her last win. Unfortunately, in 2024, she went 0-2, losing to Silva and then being submitted by Jasmine Jasudavicius back in November. And that's where it continues to show where Lipski has some of her issues in her game, is the ground game. If there are fighters that are strong enough to take her to the ground, she will often end up coming up short against those fighters. Hence the examples that I just laid out in the last 2 fights with Silva and Jasmine Jasudavicius. On the feet, she's still one of the better fighters in the division. She's very nasty with her Muay Thai combinations, landing good leg kicks, staying consistent with those leg kicks, a good jab, good combinations overall, nasty knees in the clinch as well. It's just that ground game that's a bit of a question mark at this stage of her career. And at 31, she may still be able to improve it. We've seen some decent defensive grappling from her in certain fights. It just comes down to the level of grappler that she's going up against, whether they're going to be able to exploit it or not. And I thought that Jasudavicius was the perfect one, which is why if I remember correctly, I went pretty heavy on her that night to get that dominant victory, and that's exactly what she was able to do. Now she's going up against a striker this time around in Wang, who was able to bounce back after losing as a very big favorite to Gabriela Fernandez, and that was a fight where Wang was pretty much winning 95% of it before being caught with a big shot by Fernandez, who quickly transitioned to the back and got that club and sub, putting Wang out and surprising a lot of people with that upset victory. Now, a lot of people were thinking that Brazil was going to be able to take advantage of the defensive grappling issues of Wang, but I thought those grappling issues were kind of overblown. Right? We have to give Fernandez the benefit of the doubt, because she was the one that landed a big shot first to hurt Wang, and then eventually transitioned to that position where she was able to get the submission. It wasn't just a straight up and technical takedown and grappling approach from her. She needed to hurt Wang to eventually get fights to the ground there. And Bruna Brazil, she went 0-2 on takedowns, and it was actually Wang that ended, 0-1 on takedowns is what Bruna Brazil went, and it was Wang that landed 2 takedowns that night. So it's surprising to see the striker be the one to go for the takedowns here, even though she's controlling the majority of that fight, completely outstriking Brazil and nullifying her, muzzling her offense, and just getting off on what made Wang so loved amongst the MMA fans, is how nasty she is in the striking realm. Now, this is a fun fight, two strikers, but I have to lean with the viciousness of the Kong Wang striking game. She has good output, she has good footwork, she counter strikes well, she lands with some good emphasis. Lipski could make this competitive. She might be able to kind of contend in some of those pocket exchanges, but I think for the most part, we'll see Wang be the one that lands with a little bit more significance, landing with more output as well. I wouldn't be surprised to see her try to get a takedown or two off to try to keep Lipski on her toes, but I think this is a spot where we'll see Wang win the majority of this fight. I won't bang on anybody looking to take a little bit of a dog shot on Lipski, especially near plus 300 in a fight that will be primarily a striking contest. It wouldn't surprise me if she's able to make it close, but I just don't have that confidence in her, and I think that Wang is going to be the one that comes out relatively unscathed, probably sweeping the scorecards here and winning it by decision. All right, next up, we got a welterweight matchup here. Somewhat short notice, as we have Chaos Williams coming in at minus 200, going up against Andreas Gustafsson, who comes in at plus 170. Now, both of these fighters were scheduled against different opponents over the last few weeks, I should say. Andreas Gustafsson was scheduled to fight Trevin Giles last week. Trevin Giles pulls out on weigh-in day, and then Gustafsson eventually gets... Chaos Williams was also supposed to fight, I believe, a guy named Albert Tedovesian. That guy eventually pulls out a day after he accepts the fight, and luckily both these guys waiting for opponents, the UFC was able to match them both up together here and give us a banger of a fight for this pay-per-view card. So very excited to have these guys together. Like I said, Chaos Williams minus 200, Gustafsson plus 170. Now, let's start off on the Williams side of things, who we're starting to see the ceiling of where his UFC career will likely take him. He's 31 years old, 3-2 over his last 5 fights, but you can see a clear divide between the fighters that he's beating and the guys that he's losing against. So he has wins over Miguel Baeza, Rolando Bedoya, and Carlston Harris over his last 5 fights, but also losses to Randy Brown and Gabriel Bonfim. Those guys are technically superior in the striking realm, and they're able to shut down that power striking game of Chaos with good range management, good footwork, and good just technique overall. Whereas Chaos Williams, he's a shell of what, he was originally a shell of what he is now when he first came into the UFC, mainly being a headhunter, looking for big ways to just find that big shot to put his opponents away. But he's harnessing that power a little bit better now, so he can go 15 minutes if he needs to, battering his opponents from distance, but still a little bit shaky in terms of the technical aspect of things. Normally his takedown defense is pretty on point. His strength is very good as well in terms of keeping him out of bad positions for long periods of time, and then getting back to range and landing that power, that's where he usually ends up doing his best work. Now he's going up against Andreas Gustafsson, who just earned his UFC contract through the Contender Series this past season by grinding out Pat Pitlick and eventually finishing him in the second round after wearing him down enough. Gustafsson is a guy that loves to get the job done in close quarters, wearing his opponents down up against the cage, landing some dirty boxing shots, some good knees up the middle, loves to target the body and then eventually go up to the head with those knees when he sees the openings. Very physical, a guy that wants to utilize that strength to look to take opponents to the ground. If he sees the opening for the takedown when he's in the clinch position, he'll look to get guys to the ground and try to smash them from that top position. The majority of his wins coming by KO, TKO. 34 years old. You don't often see guys at that age making it into the Contender Series, let alone the UFC, if they get the win. But apparently the UFC brass saw good enough things from him in that Pitlick fight to actually give him the opportunity, and I don't really blame him. He got the job done. He got it done in impressive fashion, and that was enough for him to earn his spot in the UFC. Going up against Chaos Williams, this is an intriguing fight. Whether both guys just want to throw caution to the wind and just throw big shots and see who ends up standing at the end of the night, or whether Gustafsson is going to look to utilize the grueling grappling approach by pushing Williams up against the cage and looking for takedowns. I don't think he'll be successful with doing it here. Williams is quite physical and strong himself, and I think he'll know that Gustafsson will likely try to do that against him. And if he can just dig those underhooks, change the position, get back out into distance, I think he can really make Gustafsson pay for some of the, I'm not saying Williams is this technical striking wizard, but Gustafsson's nothing special either on the feet. He throws with a lot of power, wide winging hooks, but Chaos Williams is a little bit slicker at this point, and he can definitely catch Gustafsson down the pipe whenever Gustafsson recklessly crashes the pocket. I like Williams here. I think that this is a spot where we'll see Gustafsson eat up a decent amount of time up against the cage with Williams defending correctly and landing some good damage in the process. And then once they back out into distance, I think we'll see Williams start landing the more effective shots, slowly start wearing Gustafsson down. Gus, a tough guy to put away. So the over 1.5 is a spot that kind of intrigues me. But I think we see this fight end up going the full 15 minutes. And I think it's going to be Williams that ends up getting his hand raised here on the scorecards. All right, moving over to the heavyweight division in a clear grappler versus striking matchup, or striker matchup, I should say. We got Sergey Spivac coming in at -125, going up against Waldo Cortes-Acosta, who comes in at +105. Now, starting off on the Spivac side, similar to what I just said about Chaos Williams, we're starting to see where his ceiling is just based on his last 5 fights. He's 3-2 with wins over Augusto Sakai, Derek Lewis, and Marcin Tybura, but he does have 2 losses in his last 3 fights coming at the hands of Cyril Gane and Jailton Almeida, who are both able to TKO Spivac after that first round. Almeida got that finish at the ending of the first round. But Spivac, the polar bear for a reason, right? This guy does a great job in terms of taking opponents to the ground, utilizing his physicality, and getting off on some good damage from that top position. That Marcin Tybura fight, that was a rematch for Spivac where he had originally gotten grinded out by Tybura over 15 minutes in their first meeting, but he almost seemed to invite the takedown from Tybura this time around because he had been so active in working with his BJJ off of his back, and almost immediately as he got taken down by Tybura, threw up an armbar that I don't think the BJJ brown belt was expecting, and we saw Spivac quickly get the tap that night in a main event slot. But the last time around, back in January, he went up against a very tough Jailton Almeida, and we saw Spivac have glimpses of success. He landed a few takedowns, had some good top control, landed some decent damage, but ultimately Almeida was able to get the reversal, get back to his feet, eventually drop Spivac, hurt him badly, take him to the ground, and ground and pound him to a victory there. Spivac, the issue in his game has been his lack of athleticism, and I think that's going to continue to haunt him against the top of the division, where he can't really, be as fast or as strong or as powerful as some of these guys. I might take back the strong thing, because he's a bull of a fighter. He's very strong when he gets a hold of his opponents, and he's been able to implement very solid trips to get top position and then get those submissions or TKO positions that he's gotten in the past. And he's still 30 years old, right? Maybe this experience that he's accruing over the last couple of years might continue to help him as he gets closer to 33, 34, and maybe he's able to evolve to another level. But from what I'm seeing right now, it's his lack of athleticism that will keep him from the top 5 of the division. Now, he's going to have to try to gatekeep here against the guy in Waldo Cortes-Acosta, who's currently riding a 4-fight winning streak and finishing 2 of those 4 fights over Lucas Dresky and last time around against Ryan Spann. Cortes-Acosta is a guy that came from a baseball background, but after numerous injuries to his elbow, if I'm not mistaken, he was forced to get away from baseball and eventually turned his attention to boxing, turned his attention to combat sports, and he's been quite successful since turning to mixed martial arts, where he's been able to put together a 13-1 record. The only loss he has on his record is to Marcos Rogerio de Lima, who utilized a good combination of calf kicks and takedowns to wear Cortes-Acosta down and just dominate him from that top position. But Cortes-Acosta, when he's on, is a very solid striker with a very mean jab, very consistent jab, and he usually stays with solid output, chipping away at his opponents from distance, utilizing decent footwork and range management, and his takedown defense is something that's a little bit of a work in progress still. I think he's almost at the border of a guy that has the type of athleticism to take advantage of a guy like Spivac. But I think this fight this weekend will truly tell us whether he has what it takes to break through to the next level. And unfortunately for him, I don't think he will. I think this is a spot where we'll see Spivac get back to his winning ways, as I think he'll be a little bit too strong for Cortes-Acosta, especially when Spivac is able to establish that top position, get that first or second takedown, and slowly start wearing Cortes-Acosta down until that submission opportunity presents itself. I'm envisioning we see Spivac eventually get that arm triangle choke in the second round of this matchup, and I think we're getting a pretty damn good line here at minus 125, and I would not be surprised if it continues to climb during fight week, getting him closer to minus 150, minus 160 by fight time. But I like Spivac here, and I like for him to win by submission. All right, moving down a weight class here, we're going to talk about a pair of light heavyweights, as we got Azamat Muzakanov coming in at minus 500, going up against Brandon Ribeiro, who comes in at plus 375. Now, starting off on the Muzakanov side, who comes in with a squeaky clean 14-0 record. He is one of the dark horses of this light heavyweight division, and I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that he just hasn't stayed all that active since joining the UFC, I believe, back in 2021. This will only be his 5th fight since joining the promotion, and there's been some some scary moments for him in terms of suffering his first professional loss. One of them, the most notable, was against Stefan Nchukwi during his UFC debut, where I thought he was losing the first 2 rounds, but ultimately landed a nasty flying knee at the beginning of the 3rd round to save himself from suffering that first loss and knocking Nchukwi out. He was able to knock out Devin Clark following that. And then the Dustin Jacoby fight, another fight where he was losing, maybe 80 to 90% of the minutes of that fight before landing big shots in 2 separate rounds that clearly influenced the judges to score that fight in his favor. And that's kind of what he brings to the table. Just because he's Russian and he has the Ov in his last name, this is not a guy that often relies on a wrestle-heavy approach to get his wins. He's more of a guy that likes to stay light on his feet, blitzing that pocket, landing big shots, utilizing a nasty uppercut as well to try to find that big shot to put his opponents away. He's 36 years old, so maybe some of that speed is going to start to taper off in the next few years, but he clearly has enough power to cause a lot of issues for a lot of his opponents. Now, talking about his opponent here in Brandon Ribeiro. Ribeiro is a guy that's been able to, really turn some heads. He started his UFC career 0-2 with a knockout loss to Mingyang Zhang, and then ultimately having a huge fight IQ flub against Magomed Gadzhiev. He's been able to have a very boring split decision victory over Caio Machado. I believe that was back in November. And then a few months ago, he was able to pull off a big upset against Dr. Nurgaji, who he was able to get a Kimura against and eventually get that quick tap after getting taken down in the 2nd round. But Ribeiro, very tall and lanky for this division. We're talking 6'3", 81-inch reach, and has some clear pop on his shots that he's been able to hurt a few opponents in the past, and even knocked out Bruno Lopez on the Contender series to earn his way into the promotion. I still have my question marks about how good the guy is. He's 28 years old, but we know he's fast. He has some pop on his shots, and he can make things hell for a lot of opponents, especially if they're not able to get to their takedown game. Now, this is a fight where I think we'll see Muzakanov lean on that wrestling to try to keep Ribeiro away from that power. You're talking about a fight here where Muzakanov is going to be at a 5-inch height disadvantage, as well as a whopping 10-inch reach disadvantage, which could definitely come into play here. I think Muzakanov eventually wears Ribeiro down and TKOs him from that top position, but while this fight is standing, Ribeiro presents a lot of trouble for Muzakanov with the shots that he can land from range, or even the counter shots that he can land whenever Muzakanov crashes that pocket a little too recklessly and leaving his chin there to be plucked. I don't want action on this fight. The only thing that's kind of, whispering in my ear here is Ribeiro by knockout. If we can get that line anywhere around plus 600, plus 700, I might take a little bit of a sprinkle on it because of the, just the sheer metrics here, the size and reach advantage of Ribeiro, and seeing he's probably at sky-high confidence coming off such a big upset last time around. I know Muzakanov is undefeated. He's a very lethal fighter as well. He has big power of his own, too. too. But I think he needs to get this fight to the ground if he wants to stay away from the danger that Ribeiro presents here. So Muzakanov by TKO will be my official prediction, but Ribeiro by knockout is definitely something to keep an eye on, given the frame that he brings to the table here. All right. Let's move on down to the lightest men's weight class now, where we got flyweights going at it as Bruno Silva comes in at plus 400, going up against Joshua Van, who comes in at minus 550. Now, starting off on the Bruno Silva side of things, he had his winning streak snap last time around as he got absolutely obliterated by Manel Kape for about 2.5 rounds before being finished in the third round of their fight. That was a fight where Kape really got to see what the top of the division looks like compared to some of the guys that he's been beating on his way to that matchup against Kape. Beating guys like JP Bays, Victor Rodriguez, Tyson Nam, in a fight where things weren't looking too great for him. Even the Cody Durden fight, it seemed like the momentum was really starting to shift towards Durden before Silva landed that beautiful uppercut to put him away. He's a solid fighter, but I don't think he's a guy that will reach that top 10, top 8 range because some of the shortcomings he has in terms of just being, thoroughly technical in certain aspects. Like, he has good BJJ, we know that without a doubt. But he also has a very solid striking game where he's been able to put together good boxing combinations, likes to chew away at the calf of his opponents. But just as we saw in his fight against Manel Kape, he's going to be at a power disadvantage in most of its fights. He's going to be at a speed disadvantage, an athleticism disadvantage, and that's what could come back to haunt him against some of the top fighters in this division. Now, he'll have a little bit of an experience advantage here over his opponent Joshua Van, who is clearly making a name for himself since joining the promotion in mid-2023, where he accepted a short notice UFC debut against a very experienced and tough Zhalgas Zhumagulov. He's now 6-1 since joining the UFC and has taken on any and all comers and taken a lot of these fights on short notice, including that win over Edgar Chairez back at Noche UFC in September. That allowed him to get back onto the winning track after a very close fight against Charles Johnson until he got knocked out in the third round of that fight. But since then, 3 straight decision victories, pretty much dominating each opponent the entire way as well. Edgar Chairez, Cody Durden, Rade Tsuruya, who's a very high-level Japanese prospect as well. But Van is a guy sometimes who has a slow start. But once he starts to find his range, his combinations, and his feet in the second round, that's where he really starts to pull away against a lot of his opponents. I love his body work. Very good combination striker. Likes to walk and stalk his opponents, landing those big shots, changing up the target, battering the body, waiting for the head to open up, and then he starts to go up to the head. I just love his fighting style all around. And not to mention, I think the Cody Durden and Rade Tsuruya fight showed that he is really improving his defensive grappling, which has bitten him in the ass way back, when he was on the Fury FC scene, as that was his lone loss before coming to the UFC, going up against a very strong wrestler who was able to keep him in bad positions. But neither Cody Durden nor Rade Tsuruya were able to put him in those spots for long periods of time, showcasing that he knows that was a point of emphasis for him to improve. Now, he's going up against Bruno Silva. Like I said, strength of schedule probably in Silva's favor, although Van has been taking off some tough competition recently. But I think that Van's striking is superior to Silva's, and I think that we'll see him start to pull away, in the second and third rounds. Kape was pretty much ahead the entire time, and Silva can definitely make this competitive early, but I think as Van starts to apply his pressure and really starts breaking Silva down, we'll see Van really start to run away with this, like I said, in the second and third rounds. Minus 550, a little bit wide for some people. I don't mind it. I'm going to try to keep my eye out for the decision prop here. If we can get it just above even money, I might pull the trigger there. Otherwise, I don't mind passing on this. I don't want to completely overlook Silva, who I've tried, or I've actually rated higher than most people in the past. So I know he is somewhat live in this fight, but it's tough to fade a guy like Van, who we know is just so reliable to go out there and get off on his style and be so aggressive with it, especially after that first round, and just finding his moments and finding the spots that he can exploit against his opponent. So I'm going to go Van here, Van by decision after a somewhat competitive first round. All right, welterweights going out of here. I believe this is the first fight on the main card as well. So something to keep in mind there. Let's get right into it. Welterweight matchup between Vicente Luque, who comes in at plus 210, going up against Kevin Holland, who comes in at minus 250. We'll start off on the Luque side of things, who have been quite low on recently, especially after that loss that he had to Joaquin Buckley. And that was a fight where, it seemed like he was slow. He was sluggish. I don't know if it was that first big shot that Buckley landed that seemed to just rattle and break Luque almost immediately, but it looked like he was moving in sand. It looked like he was moving in mud, and, that ultimately led to Buckley finishing him in the second round. That was a very un-Luque-like performance. And one thing that I tried kind of pointing to after that matchup going into the Grimbo fight is trying to remind people about that brain bleed issue that he had back, I believe, in 2022 after his loss to Jeff Neal, and that was, a near career ender for Vicente Luque. But then he came back and had that tremendous performance against Rafael Dos Anjos, and I don't know if that had to do with, just Dos Anjos fighting in a weight class where he was just a smaller guy, showing, his issues facing guys that are stronger than him, who can take him to the ground and control him. Or what, I just don't know what it was. I picked against Luque last time with Garimbo, but not to the point that I actually bet Garimbo, because there was no way I was going to do that. The way that I found to make money in that matchup was betting the under 2.5, which I believe was plus money, and we saw Luque finish the job almost immediately, getting that club and sub with his patented front choke series. He's a nasty Muay Thai striker. I think his speed is starting to, be a little less of an impact in his matchups. His durability is always going to be a bit of an issue, but when he can get to his game, when he can get into his groove, get off on his combinations, maybe even have some solid top position time against a lot of his opponents, I think that's where a lot of guys start to struggle against him. And he's still only 33 years old, which is a little surprising to me considering he has 34 fights to his name at this point in time, and we've been hearing about him for years. If I remember correctly, he was also on that Ultimate Fighter season where we had the Black Zillions go up against American Top Team, where we had Kamaru Usman come out of that season as well. So yeah, he's been around for a while. Now he's going up against Kevin Holland, who very flaky now, right? 27-13 overall record, 2-3 over his last 5 fights. Last time, very close fight against Gunnar Nelson, where had he not dropped Gunnar Nelson at the, with 8 seconds left in that first round, it's very likely that Holland would have lost that fight on the scorecards. We saw Gunnar Nelson win the second round with a lot of his control, and then Kevin Holland, it was Gunnar Nelson winning the third round with his control and keeping Holland on the defensive. In the second round, Holland was able to defend some of the takedowns, land more damage, and obviously win that round. But it was really that last split, last 10 seconds of the first round that won him that fight. Prior to that, we've seen him, get out grinded by Roman Dolidze, get twisted into a pretzel by Renier de Ritter, and even that fight against Michal Oleksiejczuk. That was a fight where he got dropped, if you guys remember, and the poor fight IQ from Oleksiejczuk saw him follow Holland to the ground and eventually get submitted with an armbar in that fight. So very weird spot for him there. This is a fight that I've kind of been going back and forth on the entire time. And what I initially settled on was Kevin Holland coming out victorious because of that speed and striking advantage he'll hold in this fight. Maybe he's able to find that sniper-like accuracy and pinpoint from distance and really hurt Luque from a distance and put him away that way. Or Luque is able to get this to the ground and find a submission spot against Holland and force the tap here, or even grind him out over 15 minutes if he can. So the two spots that I've kind of been, when I did the write-up for this, I was set on potentially betting the under 2.5, but it looks like the widely available total right now is going to be 1.5. So I'm not too hot on that. But the more that I'm thinking about it, the more that I'm considering a small shot on Luque, seeing what he did against Rafael Dos Anjos, seeing that he has the ability to grind guys out from that top position, and he usually masks his takedowns pretty well. Skill-wise, I think he's better than Holland. It's just the durability. It's the speed advantage, the slight athleticism advantage that Holland will hold in this matchup that gives me some pause. But if Luque can survive 15 minutes and he doesn't go unconscious, this is a very live and winnable fight for him. This might even be one of those spots where, a decision-only prop on Vicente Luque would be warranted if it's at a good enough line. maybe I look for that. Maybe I look for a decision-only line and see if we can get anything better than -150 on Vicente Luque. Prediction-wise, I am going to go Holland by knockout. Under 2.5, if you can get that alternate total, would be my favorite play in this spot. But I might consider a Vicente Luque play, especially at plus 220. That's a wide line, right? You're talking nearly close to, or well, I guess between 70 and 75% indicated for Kevin Holland. But we know how bad he can be off of his back. We know Luque is a high-level BJJ black belt, and it would be very surprising if Kevin Holland can submit him. But it's going to come down to whether Holland can snipe him and land those big shots to put him away. So as you guys can tell, even while I'm doing this recording, I'm so on the fence about this fight, which if that's the case, plus 220 is more than enough reason for me to take a little bit of a shot on Luque, given the potential of what kind of toss-up this could be. It's absolutely possible Kevin Holland looks -300 if he snipes Luque early here and gets him away and takes advantage of some of that durability issue. But again, like Jeff Neal, Joaquin Buckley, it took a beating for them to get Luque out of there by knockout. So maybe I'm just over-exaggerating his durability issues in my head. I don't know. Close fight. Official prediction will be Holland. But don't be surprised if you see me with a little bit of money on Luque come fight time. All right, moving on to the next matchup here. We're going to talk about bantamweights as we got Mario Bautista welcoming Patchy Mix, Bellator/PFL bantamweight champion, to the UFC. Plus 145 on the UFC veteran, -170 on the former PFL fighter. Now, we'll start off on the Mario Bautista side of things, who made his UFC debut back in January of 2019 on short notice against Corey Sandhagen and was submitted in the first round. But since then, he's gone 9-1 with his lone defeat coming in a fight where he had a minor slip-up against Trevin Jones and was knocked out in that fight, a fight that he was winning, again, 99% of. He's a nasty striker training out of the MMA lab who does a great job of just rounding out his game. He has a solid understanding of fight IQ, even if he becomes public enemy number one like he was against Jose Aldo last time around by making it a very boring fight, pushing Aldo up against the cage, landing minimal damage, and barely scraping the victory out there. But he knew that he was not going to be able to contend with Jose Aldo in open space and trying to go combination for him. So why not try to use his strength to his advantage and try to just wear down Aldo and take the path of least resistance? It's not going to win him any fans, that's for sure. But it's going to get him that double paycheck that he needs, that win and show money, but also continue to advance his career to higher levels in the rankings. His Ricky Simone fight was very impressive, where he shut down the majority of takedowns from Simone and battered him on the feet with his patented striking approach. He's very nasty with his Muay Thai, good knees, good elbows, improving defensive grappling game, just as we saw against him on Blackshear, and he does a pretty damn good job of keeping fights upright and then just battering his opponents on the feet with his striking. And again, I love that he comes out of the MMA lab, which is a very good gym in terms of game planning and executing those game plans against different levels of opponents. Now he's going up against Patchy Mix, who's now going to find out what it takes to become a UFC champion and if he is really at that level. Now we can give him some props for the run that he had in Bellator, right? Or PFLator, I guess you can call it, with the majority of his fights coming under the Bellator banner. The only loss on his record was to former champion Juan Archuleta in a fight where Archuleta shut down the grappling of Mix and then just battered him on the feet. He shut down that very dangerous choke game of Mix, which is very high level. I think he's one of the better submission artists that we have on the UFC roster. It's all about getting it there. And, he has a very nasty choke game as well, that guillotine. Very, very nasty anaconda, nasty Darce. Very good back taker as well. His striking is slowly starting to come along, trying to utilize that range, that 71-inch reach, trying to keep opponents at bay and mix in his takedowns behind it. But his last fight, well, before we talk about his last fight, let's quickly talk about his last 5 fights. Grinded out Kyoji Horiguchi, submitted Magomedov, quickly knocked out Rafael Stotts. I would have liked to see that fight play out a little bit more to see how would it really played out. Should we have seen a little bit more, skills being used from either guy? He was able to submit Sergio Pettis, and then he went into fight against Magomedov. Now, I do want to remind people, Kyoji Horiguchi and Sergio Pettis, technically flyweights. And Patchy Mix is on the bigger side of the bantamweight scale as well, right? 5'11", 71-inch reach, quite strong, gangly strength, obviously nasty grappler as well. So to be able to have those physical strengths against those guys, obviously it was beneficial for him to utilize that against those guys that are kind of smaller than him by a decent margin, and obviously end up getting the win those ways. But then the Magomedov fight last time around, that was a fight that primarily took place in the striking realm, and it was weird to see the judges so heavily go in Mix's favor. Actually, it was a split decision if I remember correctly, but I thought Magomedov won. You know, whether you give him the first 4 rounds or even 3 of the first 4 rounds, I thought Magomedov did better damage in the striking realm. You know, Mix is still a work in progress in the striking, and, you know, maybe he wanted to test it out a little bit more against Magomedov, but I think he gets touched up by better strikers in the UFC. You know, if he can't get to his takedowns, I have question marks about his ability to be effective with just his jab and his cross down the pipe. It seems like he's still trying to build the power. You know, the knee that he caught Rafael Stotts was nasty, so we can give him credit for that. But, you know, if he doesn't present too much of a threat with the striking, he might get picked apart by better strikers. And in my opinion, he's fighting a better striker here, Mario Bautista. And even though Mix will have a 2-inch height and reach advantage in this matchup, I think Bautista can do a good enough job in terms of crashing that pocket and landing some good shots of his own, but also utilizing his strength to keep this fight upright and keep Mix away from his dangerous grappling game. Even if this fight does hit the ground, I think Bautista has a good enough defensive grappling game to truly stay out of too much trouble. And there might be rounds where Mix is able to grind it out from that top position. But as long as this fight stays in the striking realm, I think Bautista has a maybe not a tougher strength of schedule, but showcasing that he can be competitive against strong wrestlers, you know, shut down most of the wrestling game. I know Mix doesn't have as straightforward of a wrestling game as Ricky Simone does, so he might have to be a little bit trickier about it. But I think Bautista can be very effective by shutting down the grappling game of Mix and then just battering him on the feet. You know, when they're in the clinch, pushing him up against the cage, landing some knees, landing some elbows, shutting down the takedowns. It's absolutely possible for Bautista to get the win here. So, you know, mix in the hype of Patchy Mix, which I'm fully aboard, right? I'm on the Patchy Mix hype train. I think he can be very successful in the UFC, but I think he needs a little bit of this learning experience against a guy like Bautista who can stop his grappling. I think who can potentially stop his grappling, keep this fight standing, and then from there really just batter him on the feet and show him, you know, what kind of striking he's going to be facing on this level. And again, I thought he lost that fight against Magomedov last time around. So, you know, Mix is still young enough that he can lose this fight and still bounce back and find himself in title contention. But I think this will be a tough wake-up call for him. And I think we'll see Bautista batter him on the feet and win this fight on the scorecards. All right. Next up, we got middleweights going at it here as Kelvin Gastelum comes in at plus 290, going up against Joe Pyfer, who comes in at minus 365. Now, this fight was originally scheduled for, I believe, 2 months ago, maybe 2.5 months ago in Mexico City. But unfortunately, Joe Pyfer fell ill, I believe, on fight day after consuming Mexican food, whatever it is. Maybe he had a taco or two that he shouldn't have had, and that caused him to get some food poisoning and cancel that fight. But we get them to throw down here, and there's a little bit of bad blood because of Joe Pyfer pulling out, and Kelvin Gastelum obviously, you know, not being too pleased about having his fight canceled here. Gastelum's coming off a fight against Daniel Rodriguez, which was originally scheduled for 170 pounds, and then Gastelum on fight week asked for it to be pushed up to 185 pounds, and maybe that played into his favor. He was able to shut down the striking of Rodriguez, land some big shots of his own, have some grappling success as well, but he's been a guy that's, you know, I feel like he's been underachieving throughout his career. He's very skilled, has some good wrestling, has some nasty power in his shots. Obviously training along with Fight Ready over his last couple of fights now. I think we're going to see him tap into some of that potential that he wasn't able to earlier in his career. But he did have success earlier on, right? Like he even earned an interim title shot against Israel Adesanya back in the day, where he was able to go the full 25 minutes, you know, pretty much being a round away from actually winning that title as well. But he's been a guy that's often been at the top of the middleweight division, either headlining fight night cards or co-main eventing pay-per-view cards, because of his skill set and the entertainment value that he brings to the table. We saw him come up short against, the Robert Whitakers, Jared Cannoniers, and the Sean Bradys, but he's still going to be very competitive against a lot of the top 10 to 15 range of this middleweight division. Unbelievable durability, good power, good wrestling, good grappling, and I think that could definitely come into play here for him against Joe Pyfer, who's pretty much just been going out there and just starching dudes. And I'd kind of be surprised if Pyfer is able to get off on that power here against Gastelum. Now, before we talk about how these guys match up, let's quickly go over Pyfer's side here, who was able to bounce back after that loss to Jack Hermanson, where he just got picked apart pretty much and grinded out over 25 minutes and losing to a veteran like Hermanson that night. But he managed to bounce back against Marc-Andre Barriault, knocking him out in the first round and showcasing that patent Joe Pyfer power. Now, before Pyfer came into the UFC, he was actually a guy that utilized his grappling, utilized his physicality to wear opponents down, take them to the ground, and either find submissions or TKO positions. But since joining the UFC, he's believed a lot more in his power, and he's just been sniping opponents and putting them away. Outside of that fight against Abdul Razak Al-Hassan, where he took him down and eventually submitted him in the second round of that fight. Now, I have question marks about Pyfer if he's not able to get the finish against guys. If he's forced to go to a decision and forced to go 15 minutes, things could start to get shaky for him, and he might start to slow down in deep water. He's going up against a very durable and tough Kelvin Gastelum, who's never been knocked out in his career. He's been submitted, sure, but I don't think Joe Pyfer is that good of a grappler as Sean Brady was to put Gastelum in those positions and keep him there and eventually find that submission. I feel compelled to take a small shot on Gastelum near that plus 300 line. I think when they were originally scheduled to fight, he was closer to plus 400, so maybe the public is starting to see it as well. But I think as we get closer to fight time, we'll probably see this line start to get wider, and that's where we'll be able to take the shot on Gastelum, hopefully closer to that plus 350 side. I could see Gastelum putting a little bit of a pace and pressure on Pyfer, landing some big shots of his own, but really starting to get to some of his grappling in the second and third rounds to wear Pyfer down there. But Pyfer's strength and physicality is a big plus for him as well. So I don't know if Gastelum will fully be able to overcome that. But one thing I know for sure, there is no way that I think that Pyfer is near 80% indicated to win this matchup when a large chunk of his win condition is for him to knock out Kelvin Gastelum. Can he submit him? Maybe. But if his primary approach is to look to land that big shot against Gastelum, I think he's going to struggle to do so. So I'm going to go out on a limb here. I'm going to go Kelvin Gastelum by decision. I think he remains competitive enough. I think he counters effectively here. I think he uses some of his strength to try to nullify Joe Pyfer. But yeah, this should be a closer fight. Either if you want to go 50-50, maybe that's a little bit of a stretch. Maybe even 60% Joe Pyfer, which would be minus 150. You're still getting a good enough line here on Kelvin Gastelum to see some value. So I'm going to go Gastelum by decision, but I'll wait it out on fight week to see if we can get a better line there. All right, next up, the first of two Bantamweight Championship matchups. This one goes down in the women's division as we have Juliana Pena coming in at plus 425, going up against Kayla Harrison, who comes in at minus 600. Now, starting off on the Pena side of things, she is looking to defend her title for the first time, even though this is the second time she has won the Bantamweight title. The first time we know was when she pulled off that massive upset against Amanda Nunes, who seemingly had no respect for Juliana Pena that night. She went balls to the wall, and now she wasn't able to finish Pena. She clearly gassed out and gave up one of the easiest submissions to Pena, allowing Pena to pull off that upset and win the Bantamweight title. Obviously, it was clear that the UFC wanted to give Amanda Nunes that rematch, knowing what she has already done for the sport and kind of cemented herself as the best women's fighter of all time. We saw Nunes completely dialed in, locked in, and she battered Juliana Pena over 25 minutes and won the title back. And then Nunes retired, leaving the title up for grabs, and the UFC decided to give Juliana Pena the opportunity to fight for it again as she took on a streaking Raquel Pennington, and then we saw obviously Pena grind that fight out. It was put up between Raquel Pennington and Mayra Bueno Silva, and then we saw Pennington get the title shot right after that, and we saw Pena a very controversial decision, split decision, very, very close fight. We saw Pena end up winning the title, which probably better for the UFC, right? Yeah, at least you got somebody trying to promote themselves, whether it's a heel or a babyface. Pena is taking the heel side of things here, trying to be the most hateable fighter in the UFC outside of Colby Covington, whereas Pennington had a nearly non-existent personality to begin with. So, better that Pena ended up winning to get a little bit more of a heated matchup here with Kayla Harrison. Pena, grappler at heart. If she can get to it, she's kind of lost on the feet. Her cardio seems a little bit suspect if she can't control the pace with her wrestling. And she's going to be in for a hell of a night here against a much bigger, much stronger, and much better grappler in Kayla Harrison. Now, Harrison obviously had a very impressive run with PFL back in the day. She lost to Larissa Pacheco in their third fight after she'd beat her the first 2 times. She managed to bounce back with a win over Aspen Ladd, which ended her PFL career. And then she quickly got signed to the UFC. I believe it was UFC 300, where she went up against Holly Holm and absolutely just obliterated her, finished her, I believe, in the second round by submission. Just did absolute work, showcasing her high-level judo background and just her strength from that top position. And the fact that she can finally start using elbows freely and just battering the shit out of her opponents, blooding them up and just leaving them in a pool of blood. Last time around against Ketlin Vera, she faced a little bit more resistance than a lot of people expected her to. I thought that fight was going to go to the scorecards. I thought Harrison by decision was the play there, and thankfully it came through for us. But she dominated the majority of that fight, really damaging Vieira from that top position. Similar to Pena, her striking is always going to be a work in progress. She has done a good enough job in terms of gapping that bridge between her striking until she's able to get a hold of her opponents, utilize her judo throws, and smash from that top position. And then when she's able to establish that top position, she's very difficult to deal with because of how strong she is and her the way she's improved her ground and pound method, just insane. The process in terms of just applying that damage from that top position to either get to a spot where she can get a submission or just keep throwing big shots until she ends up getting the TKO finish. Now here against Juliana Pena, age has kind of been the concern for Kayla Harrison, but she's 34. She's actually the younger fighter in this matchup. I know she's getting up there in age. These weight cuts cannot be good for her going down to 135 pounds, but I think she has at least a few good weight cuts left in her, maybe 2 or 3, but this one will be the most important for her so that she can get that UFC belt and obviously achieve the highest accolade in the sport of mixed martial arts, which is a UFC title. And I think she does it here in emphatic fashion. I think she's able to thwart the wrestling of Pena. I think we're going to see Pena come out like a bull in a china shop. I think she's going to try to overwhelm Harrison because she knows she won't be able to out-grapple her. So maybe if she can just put the pressure on her immediately, maybe she hurts Harrison from jump, and that allows her to get some success. But I think that it won't be long before Harrison's able to get a hold of her, drag her to the ground, and then just smash her from that top position. I'd be surprised if Pena is able to latch onto a submission off of her back. I think we'll see Harrison do a good enough job in terms of just quickly getting to a half-guard position or eventually that side control where she's able to get to a dominant enough position to really start raining down big shots, breaking Juliana Pena. And I think she eventually TKOs her in this fight. But taking Kayla Harrison to win this fight inside the distance would probably be the best way to win, to play this matchup. If you want to parlay her, you could go for it, but I think that there's nowhere that Pena is better than her in this matchup. She needs to blitz her early and try to get that chaos to ensue. Otherwise, if she tries to fight a clean fight, she's going to suffer at the hands of Kayla Harrison. But I think within 3 rounds, we see Harrison find that finish. I'm going to say TKO. I wouldn't rule out a submission, but for the purpose of this breakdown and prediction video, I'm going to go Harrison via TKO and new bantamweight champion. Now time for the main event where we flip genders and we go to the men's bantamweight division as champion Merab Dvalishvili coming in at -270, looking to defend his title for the second time. And now against the man that he wanted against back in September, Sugar Sean O'Malley, who comes in at +230. Now, start off on the Dvalishvili side of things, who came in as a pretty hefty underdog back in January when he took on Umar Nurmagomedov in a fight where it seemed like he was kind of pressured into defending that title a lot sooner than he wanted to. But like a true champion, came out there, had a very soft first 2 rounds where most of the judges, I believe, scored in favor of Umar Nurmagomedov. But then we saw the championship medal of Merab Dvalishvili start to come through. His pace and pressure started to catch up to Nurmagomedov, and we saw Dvalishvili sweep the next 3 rounds, ending up winning that fight on the scorecards and retaining his bantamweight title. technically speaking, his striking is not all that great, but it's his ability to apply that pressure, that constant activity, the constant threat of the takedown, the actual takedown, and then the mat returns that makes him so hard to deal with. And it really comes down to his cardio. We've never seen anything like his cardio in the past. Maybe EPO or was it EPO that TJ Dillashaw was taking back in the day that made him fight like a superhuman? Maybe that's what Dvalishvili's on. But regardless, the guy just goes out there and sets a pace that no fighter can keep up with. And he's been able to do it against guys like Jose Aldo, Petr Yan, Henry Cejudo, Umar Nurmagomedov. Nobody has had an answer for it. I think the best, well, other than some of the grappling and striking success that Nurmagomedov had in the first and second round of this fight, O'Malley had some success in the last round of their fight where he was able to land a big shot and keep Dvalishvili reeling for the majority of that round. But it was obvious that Dvalishvili won the first 4 rounds of that matchup. And it's just that pace, that control, that constant activity that's just so hard for a lot of fighters to keep up with. He's 34 years old, so maybe he has another year or two to continue to compete at this level of expertise and just mastery. But Dvalishvili, very difficult to deal with. Makes sense why he's minus 270 in this, especially after you see what he did in their first fight. But his opponent, Sean O'Malley, is a guy that you do not want to write off by any means, right? He was a minus 135 favorite the first time these guys threw down. Now he finds himself at plus 230 after not having any answers for Dvalishvili. Knowing what Dvalishvili was going to do, just couldn't do anything. But something that we have to give him the benefit of the doubt of is that he might, obviously you have to go through something to know how to deal with it afterwards, right? And the fact that he's already dealt with it in the first place, and obviously came up short in that fight, maybe there are certain things that he picked up in that fight that he might be able to set up traps with and spring on Dvalishvili here that could allow him to end up getting his hand raised in this spot. We know he's a nasty striker. His defensive grappling is improving at a decent rate, but I think it's without a doubt that Dvalishvili takes him down numerous times in this fight. Does he attack more aggressively off of his back? Does he work more quickly to his feet and let off on damage to kind of nullify some of the control that Dvalishvili is getting? We know that Dvalishvili can be hurt. You know, we saw what Marlon Moraes was able to do with him. We saw what O'Malley was able to do in the 5th round as well. If you can land that big shot, you can definitely put Dvalishvili in trouble, but it's following up and trying to finish it off that is the hard part, because Dvalishvili is the energizer bunny of the division, essentially, right? This guy just never stops moving, even when he's hurt. I think the line is a smidgen wide. I think we are seeing it start to come down a bit. I think when I researched this, we saw Dvalishvili closer to about minus 320. So to see him down at minus 270 makes me believe we're going to continue to get O'Malley love during fight week. The two spots that I'm kind of honing in on, Dvalishvili by decision, if we can get it anywhere near even money, because more often than not, Dvalishvili is a guy that wants to go out there and go to decision. Like, he's not a finisher. He's only finished Marlon Moraes, who was getting finished by everybody at that stage of his career. He sets a pace. He doesn't chase finishes. He just wants to overwhelm his opponents and outwork them. So Dvalishvili by decision is the first thing that I would target. The second thing is O'Malley by decision or by knockout. You know, this is a spot where he might be able to set that trap and spring it on Dvalishvili and be successful with it. So I wouldn't completely counter O'Malley because of the genius that he brings with the striking game. And again, going through it already, maybe he has the answer this time, where he's picked up on a certain tendency that Dvalishvili does, and he's able to spring the trap there, or at least set that trap and then eventually spring it in the second or third round of the matchup. So official prediction will be Dvalishvili. I just think he's almost unbeatable. I did predict a bit against Nurmagomedov last time around, because I thought Nurmagomedov would have the answer to Dvalishvili's wrestling and be the better striker, and he was for about 2 rounds until that pace and pressure started to keep up with him. Like, if you remember, like, if that was a 3-round fight, Nurmagomedov wins that fight. But 5 rounds very much favors Dvalishvili because it allows him to continue to keep up that pace and pressure that not a lot of people are able to keep up with. So O'Malley is live for a knockout, but not so much to the point that I'm actually going to sway my prediction here. I am going to go Dvalishvili to win by decision, and still bantamweight champion Merab Dvalishvili. There you guys go. UFC 316, a bit longer of a breakdown here. I got into my bag, if I'm being honest. I had a poor showing last week. I really want to straighten things out, really dissect fights as best as I can. If this was too long for you, I apologize. We've got the quick picks coming on Thursday, so stay tuned for that if that's what you're looking forward to, or maybe Wednesday. I forgot which days that I drop it on. But yeah, we're back to our regularly scheduled programming. I should have the lock of the night play drop, or lock of the night predictions / lock of the night, top 3 lock of the night candidates dropping for you guys on Tuesday, as well as the chalk or not segment, and then Wednesday quick picks, Thursday Locky two-step, Friday prop drop, Saturday fights. Looking forward to it. All right. Appreciate the love. Appreciate the support. Let's get the bag this weekend, folks. See you guys tomorrow. Peace.
Last thing.